Hello again. This time I have a few comments on the topic of existential risks. This is something that came up fairly recently, really, in transhumanist history. It wasn't a big issue in the early days. Our focus in the early days was really trying to get people to take these ideas seriously. The idea that we could actually radically extend the human lifespan, that we could augment intelligence, and so on. Uh, the tendency, the focus has shifted over the years. Now more people accept that. People talk about artificial intelligence as something pretty much inevitable, and instead the question is, what should we do about it? How should we try to control it, and so on. Even in the area of space, of course, now we're getting back to saying, oh, it's happening again. So we don't have to convince people so much. The focus has really shifted towards what should we worry about with these technologies. Now, to some extent, that's a good thing, but I'm also a little concerned that we're going too far in that direction because there's plenty of critics out there who are already focusing on the risks and telling us we shouldn't be doing these things. So I'm a little bit wary of transhumanists themselves spending too much time on this. On the other hand, of course, if they don't, then the people who do spend time looking at the risks are probably going to exaggerate them and try to stop us. So there's a balance we have to achieve there. I'm also a little bit doubtful that there are real existential risks in the true sense of the term, or I've always preferred the term extinction risks. I think it's pretty hard to actually extinguish the entire human race. It's possible, but a much more likely scenario, and it comes to essentially the same kind of concerns, is we could wipe out so much of the population that there's not much left, and it may be very difficult or impossible to actually resume a technological civilization, maybe bomb back to the Dark Ages. To me, that's essentially the more likely issue, but in practice it's not really a lot different because we're still talking about the same mechanisms. And from my point of view, from my selfish point of view, if I'm extinct, then that's a pretty bad situation. Whether or not everybody's extinct or just 90% of people doesn't make that much difference. So let's look at it from that point of view with that kind of understanding. That 90% is pretty much as bad as 100%, especially if you're one of the 90. Which issues are my main concerns? Well, this may seem pretty obvious today, but it's not new for me to have this view. But I think that disease, plagues, pandemics is actually the largest risk. And again, this is not something I've thought just since COVID, because COVID was relatively mild, but it was certainly a wake-up call. That's something I've thought for a long time. Just thinking about the plagues of the past, which wiped out a third or more of Europe, and other plagues throughout history, which have wiped out large numbers of people and could easily take down our technological civilization. Both natural plagues and even more concerning designed plagues. We've already seen, how bad just a fairly mild disease is. For most people, fairly mild. Imagine we had something much worse, something like Ebola or something worse than that, which is also highly transmissible. It could be a huge disaster, extremely bad, could potentially destroy our working civilization. So I think that has to be priority number one to me, because it is actually quite likely and a major concern, not something very science fictional. We need to focus on building better tools for detection and rapid response, being able to design solutions better. So and because we're starting to do that now with antibiotic resistance, we're looking for wide-scale antibiotics that work. We're looking for better ways of looking ahead at virus design. Actually, the vaccine for COVID was actually done pretty much in one weekend. It took just all the bureaucratic processes to get that used more quickly. So we are getting better at that, and that needs to be our approach, a defensive approach, I think. Apart from that, I would say that one worthy area to investigate, which is also beginning to happen, is asteroid impacts. These, of course, are very low probability for larger ones for any particular year, but looked at historically, they can be extremely bad, and they could actually wipe out the entire human race. It wasn't too good for the dinosaurs and other species 2 or 3 times in our geological history. So that one seems well worth doing, and it's very encouraging that there was a recent test where we were able to actually change the trajectory of an asteroid. So that's something that's promising. So those are pretty important ones. You might say, oh, what about AI? But that's not actually my next one. I would say the next one seems a little more subtle. I'm actually afraid that the end of a transhumanist future, or its inevitable and perpetual putting off of the future, could come from a decline of civilization, an increasing bureaucracy where everything gets increasingly conservative, not in the political sense, in the sense of not wanting to try anything new or risky. I'm actually quite concerned about that. I'm seeing that trend over the last few decades. People are very fearful about the future for mostly poor reasons, but some good ones. They tend to not want to try new technologies. They're just afraid of change. And on top of that, you've got increasing bureaucracies in pretty much every country, making it harder and harder to actually create new innovations and changes. Some people have argued, well, a technological singularity is inevitable. I don't think it is. I think this is something we have to be very careful about. We have to be very aware of. We have to maintain the ability to innovate. without having to answer to an entire society who get to decide collectively everything that we can do. I think that's really a recipe for stopping progress. And we can see historically that there have been periods where we've essentially made no progress for many centuries. That will be just as bad because, if that stops all of us from achieving life extension, then we're all gone. So it may not be all of us dying at the same time, but it amounts to the same thing. So that to me is the next biggest risk. Okay, so AI is the inevitable one. I'm actually not going to say much about AI because I don't consider myself a huge expert on how that works or on how you program in safeguards. I follow a lot of discussions, but I find it very hard to estimate how much of an issue AI risk is. Obviously, potentially it could be a massive risk if AI has the wrong kind of motivations. On the other hand, I find it a little difficult to think they will have motivations that conflict desperately with ours, but we can't predict how they will develop, of course. Just the point they don't have the same biological imperatives as us should be pretty comfortable, and hopefully we can program in certain kinds of tendencies to them. But again, that's not something I feel expert enough to really comment on in detail. I certainly think it would be a mistake to stop AI research or to slow it down drastically, given the potential it has for speeding up other technological progress. If AI can come about and look at our body and figure out why we age and how to fix it, say several decades ahead of time otherwise, then that's a massive reason to allow AI. So even though it's pretty risky, I think the benefits of having it are so huge we really shouldn't be stopping it. So what would be your best advice to diminish existential risks? I would say, obviously, as I said, really better design ahead for plagues, better tools for responding to them, but also, very importantly, better decision-making procedures. We're just pathetically bad as a society. All our institutions, governmental ones, many private ones, international bodies, are very bad at decision-making. I've tried to address that a little bit with the proactionary principle. And part of that, it doesn't try to specify every way of doing it, but it points out that the way to do this is to use the most scientifically validated means of making decisions. Some methods work better than others. There's a good example of historically different decisions by the same president, essentially. If you think about the Bay of Pigs crisis and the Cuban Missile Crisis, in one case the president really didn't listen to anybody else, just decided what was right and went ahead, and that was a huge disaster. And the second situation actually did open it up to other people, got different points of view, and averted the disaster. So that's a good model that we have. If we have closed institutions where we're only getting one point of view and it's being reinforced, especially if you're a very powerful person like a president, who people are going to be, yes sir, yes sir, yes madam, that's a big problem. So we have to allow genuine discussion, something which we're actually seeing less of today, as academic journals, for instance, getting controlled by certain editorial groups, Wikipedia for that matter. It's getting very hard for dissenting voices to be heard. A surprising and disturbing development. We have to use better things like idea futures markets, which have generally proven to be better at forecasting things than even experts in many areas, starting off with the early examples of HP and its printer sales. It found that even its internal experts didn't do as well as ideas futures inside the company. And it's been used for many other things, predicting opening weekends on movies and many, many other issues these days. So that's one example, but there are so many other ones that I can't go into the details of, but there are methods that are better than other methods for making decisions, and we're not really deploying those very well. And I think it's critical we do a better job with that. The last question really is, and I don't have a lot to say about this one related to this, would you prefer to see the first development of AGI in Europe, in the US, or elsewhere? Well, obviously I don't want to see it in authoritarian countries, in China, in Russia, and countries like that, again, because it's very closed and probably has pretty malicious intentions. Beyond that, really, where it develops, it's hard to say which country is better, but I think the crucial thing again is openness. Some people object, well, you can't open this up, you can't have open source, you can't allow people to see what's going on in there. But I think that's what we have to do. Only by being open about these things can we oversee the problems. As the open source community say, with enough, I can't remember the exact phrase, but with enough eyeballs, every problem is shallow, basically. With enough people looking at an issue, you can see the problems and propose solutions. And combine that with a good filtering mechanism, and I think you can hopefully avoid more of these problems. Anyway, best of luck with the rest of the conference. I wish I could be there. Thank you. Goodbye.